On a cold autumn morning, Michael, a struggling single father, while driving his daughter Nora to school in his old pickup truck, stopped to help Abigail, a stranger with a flat tire on the roadside, despite his own hardships and tight schedule. That small act of kindness opened a door that transformed his life, from an unstable job to a bright future with Nora. But what turned this chance moment into such a monumental turning point? Welcome back to Seeds of Goodness. Today, join me as we explore this deeply meaningful story. The frost clung to the earth that autumn morning, a thin shroud of silver that glittered faintly under a sky still heavy with sleep. Michael Reed gripped the steering wheel of his aging pickup, its engine coughing and sputtering as it rattled down the pitted roads of their small town. The cab smelled of worn leather and gasoline, a familiar scent that mingled with the crisp bite of the air seeping through the cracked window. In the back seat, his 8-year-old daughter Nora hummed a tune, soft and lilting, a thread of light in the gray dawn. Her dark curls were pulled into uneven pigtails, swaying with each jolt of the truck, and her small hands cradled a peanut butter sandwich Michael had mashed together in the frantic blur of their morning rush. It was a little mangled, the bread bearing the imprint of his haste, but she ate it happily. Her oversized backpack slumped beside her like a silent sentinel. Michael's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, catching her reflection, cheeks flushed from the cold, hazel eyes bright with a quiet joy he envied. His heart swelled, a bittersweet ache that pulsed with every beat. "You set for that math test today, little bird?" he asked, his voice rough but tender, a lifeline thrown into the storm of his thoughts. Nora nodded eagerly, her grin splitting wide. "Yep, Mrs. Larson says I'm a pro at fractions. I even showed her my trick with the halves yesterday." Her pride was a beacon, small but fierce, and Michael forced a smile, though it faltered at the edges. "Outsmarting me already," he said, his tone teasing but laced with a shadow of truth. "I can't even balance the checkbook without a headache." The jest hid a deeper wound. Money was a specter that loomed over them, relentless and unforgiving. His part-time shifts at the diner barely kept the lights on, and the odd jobs he scraped together, fixing a neighbor's fence, hauling firewood, were band-aids on a hemorrhage. The apartment's radiator wheezed like a dying animal. Nora's sneakers were patched with duct tape, and the truck's groans were a countdown to collapse. Every day was a tightrope walk, and Michael was running out of rope. The road unfurled ahead, a narrow ribbon of asphalt flanked by skeletal trees shedding their golden leaves in slow, mournful drifts. His mind churned. Drop Nora at school, race to the diner, pray the tips would stretch far enough to cover the gas bill glaring at him from the kitchen table. He was so deep in the arithmetic of survival that he nearly missed the sight ahead. A glossy black sedan parked crookedly on the shoulder, its hazard lights blinking like a distress signal in the mist. A woman stood beside it, her silhouette sharp against the blur of falling leaves, pacing with a phone pressed to her ear. She was out of place here, clad in a navy coat that screamed city polish, her boots gleaming despite the dust kicked up from the gravel. Her posture was rigid, a mix of frustration and vulnerability that tugged at something buried in Michael's chest. "Daddy, why's her car stopped?" Nora's voice piped up, curious and clear, cutting through his haze. She leaned forward, nose smudging the window as she peered out. Michael slowed, squinting through the windshield. "Flat tire, looks like," he muttered, his words heavy with the weight of a choice. The dashboard clock glowed 7:38, 12 minutes until his shift started. 12 minutes that could mean the difference between a full day's pay and a reprimand he couldn't afford. But the image of her, stranded and alone, clawed at him. He'd been that person too often, broken down, desperate, staring at an empty road with no help in sight. He exhaled, a rough sound that fogged the air, and flicked on his turn signal. "Stay here, Nora B. I'm gonna see if she needs help. Won't take long." Nora nodded, her eyes tracking him as he stepped out, the cold slicing through his thin jacket like a knife. He grabbed the dented toolbox from the truck bed, its hinges creaking in protest, and trudged toward the woman, his boots crunching on the frost-kissed gravel. "Morning," he called, his breath puffing into the chill. "Having some trouble?" She looked up, startled, her phone still clutched like a shield. Up close, she was striking. Dark hair swept back in a neat twist, eyes wide with a flicker of relief beneath the strain. "Oh, yes, thank you," she said, her voice quick and clipped. "Roadside assistance is backed up for hours, and I'm already late for a meeting. I don't even know what to do with this." She gestured helplessly at the deflated tire, and a faint, strained smile broke through her composure. Michael set the toolbox down, the metal clanking softly. "I'm Michael. Let's take a look." He knelt beside the car, the cold seeping through his jeans as he inspected the tire, flat as a pancake, the rim kissing the ground. "Yep, blown out. Got a spare?" She waved vaguely toward the trunk, her polished nails catching the weak sunlight. "I think so. I've never had to use it. I wouldn't know how to start." He offered her a lopsided grin, hoping to ease the tension etched into her face. "Good thing I've wrestled with worse. Pop the trunk and we'll get you moving." Her name, she said as he rummaged through the trunk, was Abigail. The spare tire was there, pristine and untouched, tucked alongside tools that looked brand new. He hefted it out, the weight grounding him as he set to work. The cold gnawed at his fingers, the gravel biting into his knees, but he welcomed it. Here was something he could mend, a small victory in a life where triumphs were rare. Nora's voice broke his focus. "Daddy, can I come see?" She'd slipped out of the truck despite his orders, her sneakers scuffing the roadside as she trotted over, pigtails bouncing. "Nora, I said stay put," he chided gently, though his heart softened at her eager face. "What are you up to, huh?" "I want to help," she chirped, planting herself beside Abigail with a beaming smile. "Hi, I'm Nora. My dad's super good at fixing things." Abigail's lips twitched into a faint, genuine smile, her guarded demeanor cracking. "Hello, Nora. He's very generous to stop for me." "Best dad ever," Nora declared, her chest puffing with pride, and Michael shook his head, a quiet laugh escaping as he wrestled with a rusted lug nut. "Remember that when I ask you to tidy your room," he quipped, though her words wrapped around his heart like a warm blanket. He didn't feel generous, just worn, stretched thin, doing what he could to keep them afloat. But to Nora, he was a savior, and that flicker of belief fueled him as he worked. The cold, and the clock forgotten for a moment in the glow of her trust. The lug nuts fought Michael like stubborn old ghosts, rusted tight against the wheel, each turn of the wrench a battle of will. His breath clouded in the frigid air, his fingers stiffening as the cold sank deeper into his bones. The gravel beneath his knees was an unyielding bed of thorns, but he pressed on, the rhythmic clank of metal against metal a quiet anthem to his persistence. Beside him, Abigail hovered, her polished boots shifting uncertainly on the uneven ground. She held the small, flickering flashlight he'd handed her, its weak beam trembling in her grip as she tried to be useful. Nora, meanwhile, stood sentinel at the roadside, her pigtails swaying as she pointed out a pair of sparrows flitting through the bare branches nearby. "Look, Daddy, they're dancing," she called, her voice a burst of sunshine in the gray. Michael grunted, a faint smile tugging at his lips despite the ache in his shoulders. "Dancing, huh? Maybe they're cheering me on." He glanced at Abigail, catching the flicker of amusement in her eyes, a crack in the poised mask she'd worn when he first approached. "Almost there," he muttered, more to himself than to her, as the last lug nut finally gave way. The flat tire came free with a dull thud, and he rolled it aside, reaching for the spare. It was a simple task, one he'd done a dozen times on his own faltering truck. But here, under her gaze and Nora's chatter, it felt heavier, weighted with something he couldn't name. Abigail's voice broke the quiet, soft and tentative. "I can't believe you're doing this. You don't even know me." She adjusted the flashlight, her fingers tightening around it as if anchoring herself. "Most people would have driven right by." Michael shrugged, keeping his eyes on the wheel as he aligned the spare. "I've been stuck on the side of a road before. Know what it's like to hope someone stops." His tone was matter-of-fact, but the memory flickered in his chest. Nights with a dead battery, Nora asleep in the back seat, the silence of an empty highway pressing in. He tightened the first bolt, the wrench cold against his palm. Just doing what I'd want done for me. She didn't reply right away, but he felt her watching him, her silence thick with something unspoken. When he stood at last, wiping his hands on his jeans, the spare tire was secure, the car steady once more. There, he said, giving the wheel a firm shake. Should hold you till you get it fixed proper. Take it slow, though. Spares aren't meant for racing. Abigail exhaled, a long, shaky breath that seemed to unravel the tension in her frame. Thank you, she said, her voice raw with gratitude. She handed him the flashlight, her fingers brushing his for a fleeting second. You've saved me today, Michael. I don't know what I'd have done otherwise. He waved it off, the lopsided grin returning. No big deal. Glad I could help. He turned to Nora, who'd wandered over with a shiny pebble clutched in her fist. Ready, little bird? We've got to get you to school. Nora bounded up, holding out her treasure. Look, Daddy, can we keep it? It's so pretty. We'll see, he said, ruffling her curls as she scrambled back to the truck. But Abigail stepped forward, her polished demeanor faltering as she reached into her bag. Wait, please, let me give you something. For your time, for lunch for you and Nora. It's the least I can do. Michael shook his head, firm but gentle. That's kind of you, but I didn't stop for a reward. Just keep it moving forward, yeah? He met her eyes then, and saw a flicker of confusion, then something softer. Admiration, maybe, or disbelief. It wasn't a look he was used to, and it unsettled him, stirring a warmth he quickly buried. Abigail hesitated, then pulled a sleek leather notebook from her bag. Can I at least have your number? I'd feel better knowing I can thank you properly someday. Her tone was earnest, almost pleading, and Michael paused, torn between his instinct to fade back into his quiet life and the pull of her sincerity. After a beat, he fished a crumpled receipt from his pocket and scrawled his number with a stubby pencil from the toolbox. If you're ever stuck again and I'm around, give me a call, he said, handing it over. She tucked it into her bag, her smile small but real. I will. Thank you, Michael. Truly. He nodded, a quick wave, and climbed back into the truck. The engine sputtered to life, and as he pulled away, Nora's voice piped up from the back. Daddy, why didn't you take her money? We could have had hot cocoa. Michael glanced at her in the mirror, her wide eyes searching his. Sometimes, Nora B., people need kindness more than cash. Helping her felt good. Better than cocoa, even. He winked, though his words carried a weight he hoped she'd one day grasp. She tilted her head, chewing on that thought. Like a superhero? He laughed, the sound rough but warm. Something like that. Except superheroes get capes, and I've just got these beat-up boots. Boots are cooler, she decided, settling back with her pebble, and Michael's chest tightened with a quiet, fierce love. The drive to school was uneventful, the town waking slowly around them, but Michael couldn't shake the encounter. Abigail's gratitude lingered like a ghost, her polished presence, her quiet surprise at his refusal to take payment. It wasn't just kindness she'd offered. There was a depth to her gaze he couldn't place, a mix of wonder and something heavier. He pushed it aside, focusing on the road, on Nora's chatter about fractions and birds. Meanwhile, Abigail sat in her car, the engine idling as she stared at the crumpled receipt in her hand. Her phone buzzed with missed calls, her meeting, her life, pulling her back, but she couldn't move yet. Michael's easy smile, his calloused hands working without expectation, replayed in her mind. She'd met plenty of people who'd take her money without a second thought, but he'd been different, genuine in a way that felt rare, almost fragile. Tucking the paper into her bag, she felt a spark of something unfamiliar. Hope, maybe, or the stirrings of a debt she wanted to repay. As she drove off, late but oddly unburdened, she knew she'd call him again. Not today, but soon. Weeks blurred by for Michael. Diner shifts, bills, bedtime stories for Nora. One Tuesday night, as he sank into the couch with a lukewarm coffee, his phone buzzed. An unknown number. He answered, cautious. Hello? This is Michael. Hi, Michael. It's Abigail, from the flat tire a few weeks back. Her voice was warm, a little nervous, and Michael sat up, the memory rushing back. "Oh, hey, everything okay? Tire holding up?" "It did, thanks to you," she said, a smile in her tone. "But that's not why I'm calling. I've been meaning to reach out. You gave me your number and I wanted to thank you properly. You went out of your way that day and it stayed with me." Michael rubbed the back of his neck, surprised. "Abigail, you don't need to do that. I was just glad to help." "But I do," she insisted gently. "I've thought about it a lot. You stopped when no one else would. I'd like to meet, if you're free. I have an idea I think you'll want to hear." He hesitated, glancing at the stack of bills on the counter, at Nora's drawings pinned to the fridge. "All right," he said finally. "I'll hear you out." The cafe smelled of roasted coffee and cinnamon, a cozy hum threading through the chatter of Saturday morning patrons. Michael arrived early, his best flannel shirt ironed crisp despite its frayed cuffs, his boots scrubbed clean of the week's grime. He sat at a corner table, fingers drumming on a chipped mug, nerves twisting in his gut like a coiled spring. Abigail's call had lingered in his mind all week, her voice, warm yet insistent, promising something he couldn't quite fathom. He wasn't sure what to expect, but the stack of overdue bills at home and Nora's hopeful chatter about new crayons had nudged him here, to this moment. She arrived moments later, her navy coat swapped for a simple sweater that softened her edges, though her poise remained unshakable. "Michael," she greeted, her smile bright and unguarded. "Thank you for coming." "Of course," he said, standing to shake her hand, his calloused palm dwarfing hers. "I'll admit, I'm curious." She settled across from him, folding her hands on the table, her eyes steady with purpose. "I'll cut to it. I want to offer you a job. At one of my companies." Her words landed like a stone in still water, rippling through him. Michael blinked, caught off guard. "A job? Abigail, I'm not sure I'm cut out for anything fancy. I'm just a guy who fixes things." "Let me finish," she said, her tone gentle but firm, a spark of conviction in her gaze. "You told me you've done handyman work, right? You're good with your hands, reliable. I run a few businesses. One manages rental properties. We need someone for maintenance, repairs. It's steady work, with benefits. Not glamorous, but real." His breath hitched, the weight of her offer sinking in. Steady work. Benefits. Words that felt like lifelines, dangling just out of reach his whole life. "I don't know what to say," he managed, his voice low. "That's incredible. But are you sure? I've never done anything like that full time." "I'm sure," she replied, leaning forward. "I saw you that day, calm, determined, kind. That's rarer than you think. You'll have training, support. I believe in you, Michael." He looked away, out of the window where a young family laughed over a spilled cup, the normalcy of it piercing him. He thought of Nora, her patched sneakers, her dreams of art supplies he couldn't buy, the way she looked at him like he could fix anything. Then Abigail reached into her bag, sliding an envelope across the table. "This is for you, too. A thank you, or a start, if you want to call it that." He opened it hesitantly, his breath catching at the sight of a check, $10,000, scrawled in neat ink. "Abigail, I can't take this," he said, shoving it back toward her, his voice rough with disbelief. "Yes, you can," she insisted, her hand stopping his. "It's not charity, it's an investment, in someone who deserves a break. You gave me your time, your kindness, with no strings. Let me do this for you." Michael stared at the check, his mind reeling. It wasn't just money. It was heat for the apartment, new shoes for Nora, a buffer against the endless grind. "I'll try the job," he said finally, his voice steady despite the tremor in his chest. "I don't know if I'll be any good, but I'll give it everything." Abigail's smile was relief and triumph combined. "That's all I ask. Thank you, Michael." 2 weeks later, he started. Days of leaky pipes, tenant calls, and drywall patches. It was hard, a whirlwind of learning, but every fix felt like a small victory. Abigail checked in often, her calm reassurance a steadying hand. "How's it going?" she asked one day, watching him replace a light fixture, sweat beading on his brow. "Better than I thought," he admitted, wiping his hands. It's work that matters. You're doing great, she said, her pride evident. The tenants notice it too. The paycheck came like clockwork. The benefits eased his constant dread, and the $10,000 erased the bill's shadow. He bought Nora new sneakers, art supplies, even took her to the zoo, a day she recounted nightly with wide-eyed glee. One evening, as they sat at their tiny table, her pencil scratching out fractions, he said, "Guess what, little bird? Daddy's got a new job. A better one." Her eyes lit up. "Really? Can we get Pizza Fridays again?" He laughed, ruffling her curls. "Yeah, I think we can." Months passed, and the job became more than survival. It was purpose. Abigail remained a quiet constant, their bond growing into a friendship forged in mutual respect. One afternoon, as he painted a vacant unit, she texted, "You're making a bigger difference than you know. Proud of you." His chest tightened with gratitude, words he couldn't voice but felt deep. Then came the day she asked to meet again at that same cafe. Her eyes sparkled with something new, excitement, ambition. "I've been thinking," she began, her coffee untouched. "You've exceeded every expectation, Michael. The care you bring, the dedication, it's special. I want to expand the property business, and I can't do it alone. I need a partner. I want it to be you." He froze, the word partner echoing like a dream he'd never dared to dream. "Abigail, I'm just getting the hang of this. A partner? That's a whole other world." "I know it's big," she said, her voice steady. "But you've proven yourself. I trust you. With the work, with people. Think about it, not just for me, but for you and Nora." He stared into his mug, her words igniting a fire he'd long buried. Hope, possibility. He talked it over with Nora that night, her small voice cutting through his doubt. "You should do it, Daddy. You always say to be brave." With her blessing, he called Abigail. "I'm in," he said, his resolve firm. The partnership was a leap. Budgets, contracts, leading a team. But it was fulfilling. A foundation he built brick by brick. They moved to a modest house near Nora's school, the trucks grown, replaced by stability. One morning, as he walked her to the bus, she asked, "Would you have met Miss Abigail if her tire didn't go flat?" He smiled, squeezing her hand. "Probably not. Funny how one little thing can change everything." As the bus rolled away, Michael stood there, the autumn chill whispering through the trees. He thought back to that cold dawn, the tire, the stop, the spark of kindness that had unraveled his life and stitched it anew. It wasn't just a job or money Abigail had given him. It was belief, in himself, in a future he could shape. For the first time in years, the road ahead didn't loom with dread. It shimmered with promise. A horizon he'd earned, one act of goodness at a time.